Okay. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Houston Lodge meeting. Today we have our guest speaker, Mr. David Bruce. He is the author of the book, Serving a Higher Purpose, which he has presented to us in past session, and he's coming back. And this is the most interesting one. This chapter 11. We're going to talk about the reflection and the voice of the silence. So we are very pleased to introduce David, and he's going to be joining us today to facilitate on the essay that are talking about Maya or illusion. So, David, you can take over.
Treat. Thank you. I'm very pleased to be here, and thank you for inviting me. I was here last August and I spoke on a different chapter. I don't recall which, but when Treat asked me to speak again, he specified chapter 11. I presume that's chapter that your group has been on for some time. So I don't always read my book. I mean, I wrote them and I don't go back and read them. So I had to look up chapter 11. What is in chapter 11? Then I realized that's a long chapter. There's 36 essays, and they all are based around quotes from the Voice of the Silence, which you know. And I thought, wow, what am I going to pick out of that whole chapter? And after I surveyed it and thought of several possibilities, I came up with an idea or a theme that kind of runs through many, but not all, many of those essays. So I've titled this Illusion, Delusion, Discernment, and Maya. And unlike August, when I basically just spoke, and that's usually what I do. I don't usually use PowerPoint. But when I started putting this together, I realized I'm going to be doing a lot of excerpts, a lot of quotations, and I figured it would be easier for you to see it up on the screen. So I did put together a little PowerPoint. It's nothing fancy, but I think it'll help. And the other thing I want to mention is that I hope I'm not the only one talking for the whole presentation. I do intend to, at certain strategic spots, if you will, stop and kind of discuss what we've been looking at up on the screen and ask for people's feedback. Okay, so Treat, how much time do we have, just so I don't run too short or go too long?
We have all the way to noon.
Oh,
so
okay.
If you need more, then we can extend. I booked the meeting beyond that, but that's okay.
All right, thank you. Well, as Treat said,
sorry to interrupt, David. So, do you want it to be more along the, if someone has a question, should they wait to the end, or should they basically stop you and ask the questions, or how do you want the format to be?
I don't mind answer if something comes up in the moment. I don't mind. Let me finish my sentence, and then and if I, sometimes I get absorbed in this. And Treat, if you see somebody raising their hand and I don't see it, just jump in there, So,
okay.
Yeah. But there are some spots where I definitely will. I have some questions that I've devised, discussion questions. But otherwise, yeah, let's just be kind of loose.
Okay. Great.
And as you might imagine, I'm kind of qualified to speak on this because I've known the author for many years. In fact, I've known the author on a first name basis. So, okay. I've divided this presentation into 5 different sections. And each of those 5 sections is based on one of the essays. And I'm going to pull up the screen here pretty soon. And the first one will be on chapter, well, it's on page 120, The Power of Discernment. So let me just take a second here. I'm not a real pro at PowerPoint, so give me a minute. Here we go. And let me minimize this screen. Okay. So there again are the topics that I'm going to touch about, not necessarily in that order, but in fact, we're going to start with discernment. That's the first one. But I just arranged them because illusion, delusion has kind of a nice ring to it as far as titles. I should have made a little larger cursor. There we go. Okay. I'm seeing that. Okay, the power of discernment. From my book, Before the Neophyte, that's a beginner, a novice, before the neophyte takes the first step on the path, he is advised to develop the power of discrimination. Who advises the neophyte? Well, a lot of very wise sages from the past, because this is not a new idea. This is something that you can find in many of the old scriptures. And it's been known, this need to develop discrimination, which is also called by the Sanskrit name Viveka. That word was in existence before the English language even was created. So back 1,000, 2,000 years ago in India, particularly, the sages, the gurus were talking to the young disciples about the need to develop Viveka. We translate that in our language commonly as discrimination. The little book, which you're all familiar with, At the Feet of the Master, that little book uses that term. That term has some connotations if people are not familiar with how it's being used, and it might have negative connotations, but we still use that word. For instance, if somebody is a wine taster, a very good wine taster, we say he has a discriminating sense of taste. But another word you can use instead of discrimination is discernment. I like that word too. And Clara Codd has also used the word insight. Now, let me just minimize the screen for a second here. I'm going to read from something that's not on the PowerPoint because I just thought of it this morning. So this was kind of a last minute decision on my part. I printed out a couple of pages or a couple of paragraphs from a talk I did years and years ago, where I elaborated upon Viveka. So we have these different terms though: discrimination, discernment, insight. Let me just say a little bit. I love words, as you know. I love to look at the different nuances between words that are similar. It's kind of like if you were in an orchestra and you're playing a melody and it's played by a trumpet and it's played by a clarinet and then the first violin, the quality changes as you go from one instrument to another. And sometimes with different words, they carry different shadings. So to me, this is just personally my subjective feeling, the word discrimination to me denotes a decisive ability to take decisive action, which is informed by good judgment. Whereas the word discernment carries something a little extra, which implies acute perception, discerning something that is perhaps subtle, not easily seen. And then the word insight carries another, they're all the same. You can use all these, by the way, and they are all used by different writers, but just looking at the words in and of themselves, insight to me implies a sudden, even a spontaneous realization of a truth or a principle, a sudden realization, obtaining of a deeper insight. So I think all those meanings are kind of rolled up in the word viveka, which again is a Sanskrit word. I'm going to talk about this not as a quality, you know, being short, being a short person or a tall person, those are physical qualities, right, of your physical body. Being a patient person or a kind person, those are qualities of your personality. Or being thrifty with money or greedy. These are qualities that desirable or undesirable qualities that we could call them attributes of our physical or psychological, or if somebody's honest, it's a quality of their moral nature. But we're not really, when we talk about discrimination or discernment, or viveka, let's stick with a Sanskrit word for now, not really talking about a quality. We're talking about a faculty. And for years and years, I didn't realize this. I had thought of it as a quality, an attribute, a spiritual attribute or a mental attribute. But it's really it falls into a different category. Now, here's a quote from Hamlet, Shakespeare's Hamlet. "What piece of work is man? How noble in reason, how infinite in faculty." So what did Shakespeare mean in that quote when he's talking about faculty? Well, a faculty is an ability that is related to consciousness, right? It's related to our awareness. And it's an ability that can be inborn, innate. We come into the world with it. Or it can be one that we can develop or cultivate or acquire it. If we're really lacking at it, we can acquire. For instance, if your wife tells you you're very impatient, like my wife does to me, I can try to become more patient over time and work on it. And so you can work on your power of discernment if you think that you're a little bit lacking in that area. So the word faculty also carries the idea of skill, of competence, of usefulness, of practicality, all those things. And it's even, you can look at it, a power, like the power of speech, the faculty of speech, the power of sight, that's a power. Sight is a faculty, hearing is a faculty. These are types of powers that we have. And here's the quote that really got me turned around from thinking of viveka as a quality or attribute. I used to think of it that way without even giving it a second thought. I was reading in the Secret Doctrine, the 1978 edition, and this was, I don't know what I was looking in the selected bibliography for, but there's a selected bibliography at the end. And this is by Boris Dzirkov, who is the editor of that edition. Very short quote here. "An integral facet of spiritual growth is the development of the discriminative faculty." In other words, it's an essential part of our spiritual growth to develop this viveka, this discriminative faculty within us. And let's see, I don't want to go too long on this. Oh, here's a wonderful I.K. Timney. You've heard of him, right? You probably, at least if not read his books, you've heard of them. I don't know which book this came from, but I'll just read what he has to say because it applies to this and he kind of expounds on it in a way that makes it more clear. He says, "After we have passed through all kinds of experiences, life after life, and have gradually begun to give our thoughts to higher things and to live a noble and unselfish life, the next vehicle that on the Buddhic or intuitional plane also begins to develop slowly, and the illumination from this region into the mind shows itself as the faculty of discrimination." Earlier, he used the word vehicle because in the prior paragraphs, he had been talking about the astral vehicle, the mental vehicle. So he's kind of working up in this particular context, he's working up to the higher faculties. And I'll just read this last bit. "This is the faculty with whose help all spiritual truths are recognized. We don't recognize a spiritual truth without bringing this faculty into play in some shape or manner. He goes on to say, without that, we would make no spiritual progress. And he tops it off with one final caveat: mere intellect. He's not putting down the intellect. He's just saying mere intellect is of no use in a region that is outside of its scope. The intellect is a marvelous thing, and developing one's intellect is very commendable. But there comes a realm of seeking for truth where the intellect has to take a back seat, and then you bring in the higher faculties. So that is a whole talk in and of itself, but we won't, I just mentioned that in passing. So having set that up, I'm going to bring back the PowerPoint.
David?
And, oh, hold on one second. Let me, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say, you're talking about the Sanskrit word, you know that I think that it was a comrade of Blavatsky's, but that was Vivekananda, Swami Vivekananda. Of course, that's the Vivekananda. It's that same thing that you're talking about, that is his name. I always wonder what it meant. But I think that he and Blavatsky were instrumental in bringing yoga to the United States, that, you know, introducing this idea of, or bringing it back, the hatha yoga and yoga. So just making note that his name, you know, carries that same thing we're talking about.
And to add to what you just said, when we had the first World Parliament of Religions in Chicago in 1893, Annie Besant, I believe, or no, who was the president? Was it Alcott, Colonel Alcott? That was the first time a lot of people in this country got exposed to some really high-class, top-notch speakers on Eastern wisdom. So the Theosophical Society as an organization played a great part in bringing a lot of the Eastern wisdom to the West. By the same token, Colonel Alcott, I'm getting off on a tangent now, but when he was in India and he went to Ceylon, which is now Sri Lanka, he restored respect amongst the native people there for their native religions of Buddhism, because the Christian missionaries had denigrated their original religions and tried to shove Christian teachings down their throat. And Alcott said, no, you don't have to be ashamed of your past religions. In fact, these religions have a lot to say. So I'll move on, otherwise I could get sidetracked and we'll never get through all of this. We'll go back to the screen. Here we go. Okay, so let's go to the next one. All right, this is a beautiful quote. Before thou takest thy first step, learn to discern the real from the false, the ever fleeting from the everlasting. Let's go to another wonderful quote. This is verse 30, a little bit later in fragment 1. The wise ones tarry not in the pleasure grounds of the senses. So let's just stop that for a second. Any thoughts on that last one there? The pleasure grounds of the senses? Any idea what that means or what it's referring to? Or you can comment on the earlier one, before thou takest thy first step, learn to discern the real from the false, the ever fleeting from the everlasting. You know, in the book of, well, in Brahmanical philosophy, Viveka, the first application is to discern the real from the unreal. Then you have all these other subcategories. And they're talking about the ultimate reality there, which is encapsulated in the first fundamental proposition of the secret doctrine. That's not to say this world that we live in is not real. It exists, but it's not, it's a world, the world we live in, and you and I, everything is changing. It's not real in the sense that it's eternal or changeless. We live in a world of constant change. Our own beings, our own psyche, our minds, everything is changing. Now, there's another beautiful verse here coming up. This is verse 14. It's part of 3 verses, somewhat longer verses. These verses all, they're like conditional verses. They say, if you do this, then you get that. If this happens, this is the result. So this one starts off with 2, what you might say, upbeat or apparently upbeat positive statements. If thy soul smiles while bathing in the sunlight of thy life, if thy soul sings within her chrysalis of flesh and matter. So if you just look at that at the surface, if that's all you were to read, you would probably think, okay, this is talking about being happy, smiling, singing, sunlight. This is followed, still going in verse 14, with 2 more sentences or 2 more verses. Now we go from upbeat to sorrow. If thy soul weeps inside her castle of illusion, there's that word illusion. If thy soul struggles to break the silver thread that binds her to the master. Okay, so we've had 4 lines, if, and you know this is coming to a conclusion. It has to, because it's setting it up for, okay, what happens? But we're going to go back now before we get to the conclusion, the concluding statement. If thy soul smiles, everything is going good in life. Things seem, you know, you're not having any problems right now. You're wrapped up in yourself. Today we say you're in your bubble, using modern language. But you have to know that this is kind of an illusion, because these things do not last. We have in life, if you live long enough, you know that what we call the quote unquote good times, they do not last. We enjoy them while they happen, but if we're clinging to them, well, we'll see what does the voice say about that. Now, the pendulum swings the other way. Difficulties happen internally, externally, family problems, job problems. Maybe we have loss of confidence in ourselves. And the second line here, probably, I think you can all relate in some way to the idea we create these little castles of illusion that we live in. We're going to talk more about that later. But this second one does require, I think, the silver thread. The soul is struggling to break away from what? The master here is not a guru, but it's our higher self. It's our spiritual self. And it's really there, the soul refers to the lower side of our personality, the impulsive, the part that's wrapped up in the illusion of me as a separate entity. And it doesn't want to listen to the voice of the higher, because he wants to have fun. He wants to go back to the good times, the smiling and laughing, which were kind of illustrated in the previous. So if any of these apply, the voice of the silence is telling us, if any of these apply to us, then what? What is the result? Know that you're earthbound. Know, O disciple, thy soul is of the earth. So let me just pause that for a second. So that comes from verse 14. And by the way, I'm sure you have a copy of the voice of the silence. Here's my copy. You can see how threadbare it is. right here is 14. You turn the page and you have two more rather long, see that? You see all my notes there. And they all, so this one started if thy soul. The next one is when, blah, blah, blah. The next two begin when, and then it ends with a concluding statement. So you might want to look at those. Those three by themselves are worth meditating on and thinking deeply on. All right, from here, I'm going to go in a slightly different, we're given not a different direction, but give a different perspective on this whole idea of Viveka. And this comes from an excerpt from an article entitled The Depth of Existence. I'll bring the PowerPoint up. I have 3 short paragraphs. The Depth of Existence by Paul Tillich. Anybody heard of Paul Tillich? Oh, Anne has, okay. For those of you that's a new name, Paul Tillich, he died in 1965. He was in the first part of the 20th century. He was very prominent as a theologian. He taught at Union Theological Seminary in New York, and then later at the University of Chicago and also Harvard University. He's unlike, I think, most other theologians. He doesn't sound like an Orthodox Christian theologian. He sounds like he's outside the box. In fact, when I first came across this essay, which is from a book Tony Lissy loaned to me one time, the book is called Shaking the Foundations. So Tony lent me the book, and I saw that it was a chapter, an essay, The Depth of Existence. I said to myself, this guy, he sounds just like a Theosophist, or very much like a Theosophist. So see if you agree. I'll pull this up now. We'll just go through a few of these excerpts here. And okay, there's a picture of Paul Tillich in his later years. The words deep and depth are used in our daily life, in poetry and philosophy, in the Bible, and in many other religious documents to indicate a spiritual attitude. Although the words themselves are taken from a spatial experience. Depth is a dimension of space. Yet at the same time, it is a symbol for a spiritual quality. He continues, all visible things have a surface. Surface is that side of things which first appears to us. If we look at it, we know what things seem to be. Yet, if we act according to what things and persons seem to be, what happens? We are often disappointed. Our expectations are frustrated. And so we try to penetrate below the surfaces in order to learn what things really are. Before I go to the concluding paragraph, that is so true. I'm sure everybody here can relate to that. Look at relationships. People think they have a friend, then find out later it really wasn't a friend. That person was just here to use me. People get married, think they're in love. Maybe they are in love, but maybe they're not seeing the whole person that they're married to. And with time, they begin to see below the surface. And sometimes, unfortunately, people see things that are disturbing or things that they didn't see initially when they were quote unquote in love. And in many cases, it becomes so acute that it destroys that relationship. So let's continue. Most of our life continues on the surface. Well, my editorial comment is, we may like to flatter ourselves that we live at deep levels, but if you're honest, at least looking at my life, a lot of it is just taking care of daily things, shopping, doing repair work. A lot of it is just this is surface stuff. I'll continue with his words now. We are enslaved by the routine of our daily lives in work and pleasure, in business and recreation. We are conquered by innumerable hazards, both good and evil. We are more driven than driving, meaning we're not in control all the time. We do not stop to look at the height above us or to the depth below us. We are always moving forward. Love this, although usually in a circle, which finally brings us back to the place from which we first moved. That is kind of funny, isn't it? I mean, I don't think you can argue with a lot. It's just common sense when you stop to look at how people live. It's the human condition, right, throughout history. That can be said of, I think, of most people in any country, any time, any culture. Because people are not really that much different from one another. If you allow for the differences in language and customs and things like that, inside, deep down, we're pretty much all the same. So I'm going to go on. Any thoughts on that? That section, by the way, was on the power of discernment, that particular essay. Okay. The next one is the limitations of the mind. I kind of alluded to that before when we said there are some things the mind it cannot do. So let's go back to the screen. Okay. The limitations of the mind, and here, wow, the mind is the great slayer of the real. I'm sure you've heard that many, many times before. Probably all of you have heard that. And from my book, I said, perhaps no other verse from the Voice has been so often quoted, yet so little understood as the one above. I have to say, let me interject. When I used to read before we had the Quest magazine, back in the 70s and 80s, they had the American Theosophist. That was our journal. And we didn't have pictures at that time. There was no color photographs. It was just all articles. And so many articles had that quote. The mind is the slayer. The mind is the slayer of the real. And people would give lectures. I would go down from Milwaukee to Chicago, to Wheaton, for summer conventions and hear speakers. And so many times you'd hear people talking about it. So to continue with my book quote, some have assumed it to be a denigration of the mind. No. Others that the training and development of mental faculties are unimportant. And those are for emphasis. That is definitely a misreading of the text. That is not what this quote means. The mind is a great slayer of the real. It's not to denigrate the mind. What it is saying, hey, when you approach the realm of ultimate reality, that's what that word real with the uppercase R, that's what that is referring to. In Eastern philosophy, in Eastern metaphysics, the mind cannot experience that. It cannot go there. And the sense, well, let me ask you, let me close this down. What do you think? Maybe some of you have some insights. What do you think what does that suggest to you? There's no, and I'm not going to say there's a correct answer or incorrect answer, but since that's that verse has been referred to by so many speakers and writers, I thought it'd be worth pausing on that for a second.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah. Well, the basis of Advaita or non-duality is really that the mind doesn't interfere with reality. And so if we're not, and that is when we're one with source. So anytime we're not one with source, then we're slaying reality. And as you say, it's not really a criticism. It's just really, that's the way the human, the brain works. That's the way we've been I mean, in Eastern philosophy, they would say that that's the way consciousness expresses itself, just for the experience, for Leela. So it's not really to be avoided. I mean, it's to be embraced, except for many of the patriarchal religions really want us to transcend everything. And then a lot of the goddess religions, the feminine backed religions, want us to embrace and everything made sacred. So some want us to transcend this state, some want us to embody this state. And so I'm not sure what she wanted us to do when she said that, or even if there was any kind of demand on that, what we should do. But I think it's an incredible quote. I think it's really great, because I watch my mind do that constantly. It's like, goodness, 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 goodness. I mean, anytime I just have an opinion, I'm slaying what's real. An opinion versus an experience.
Our minds like to put labels on things, don't they? We like to categorize things or define them. The minute you start doing that, you have the experience, and it's the immediate experience of whatever it is. And then once you start looking at it and saying, this experience is this, that, or the other, you're changing it. You're putting words or concepts over it. And anyway, that was good, Ann. Let's go back. There's one follow-up.
I just wanted to say one more thing. It's like, I think the mind tries to translate reality, and it doesn't need to be translated, because it's already speaking in a language that we can understand.
Well, that can be useful in some cases when you're trying to explain something to another person, but here,
no, I'm talking about whatever we see, experience anyway through our senses, then we try to translate that into something, whether it's good or bad, or I mean,
that's true.
Kind of good or bad. We're always translating everything with the backdrop of this is good, this is bad. I don't believe this. I do believe this. This supports what I believe. I don't believe that. And so it's translating everything into our language, into our experience. But reality only needs experiencing. It doesn't need commentary.
Thank you. I'm going to go back to the so let me move ahead now. I took that verse, which was verse 4, and put them both up with verse 5. Oops, went too far there. Oh, no. There we are. The mind is a great, okay, we just did that. Let the disciples.
David, sorry
Yes.
to interrupt, but I have a comment about the word real, because real to me is a relative term.
Yeah, there is two
real,
sets.
Yeah, you talked about real in the physical world that we're living in, or real in the astral world, in the mental world.
Yeah, I know what you're saying. Yeah, this quote, verse 4, the mind is a slayer of the real. We're not talking here, Blavatsky, using their word real. She's not talking about our daily reality, which we perceive differently. She's not talking about our subjective experiences. She's not talking about anything mundane like that. She's talking about the ultimate reality, which is beyond words, beyond concepts. It's timeless, it's boundless, it's immutable. That is what the mind is a slayer of. The mind doesn't, everything else, the mind is very apropos to be used to in an intelligent way. Go ahead, Ann. I see you have a question.
Oh, you muted.
You're muted.
And you muted.
No, I didn't. I just actually was kind of had my hand resting on my.
Oh,
I didn't know.
Sounded like you had a browser on or something. I heard something. Okay.
No, I'm on mute. Somebody else is not muted.
So the next quote, let me go back to that. I won't spend too much time on it, but right here, let the disciples slay the slayer. That follows the previous verse. And we already talked about that. That's something to consider. It doesn't mean literally. You don't take that word slay literally. It just, I think to me, it means that function of the mind should not come into play when one is contemplating the ultimate reality. We shouldn't conceptualize about it because it's beyond words. You really cannot say, the less you say about it, the better. And the words, perhaps when you're talking about the ultimate reality, words are useful in the sense that you can say what it is not. It's not this, it's not that, it's not the other thing. But words fail us when we try to convey what the ultimate reality is. Something that words the mind, it falls short. So now we go to another chapter in my book, The Illusion of Death.
David, may I ask a question?
Absolutely.
Neophytes would call me a neophyte, so please excuse my question. But in this essay that you were discussing, it says yogis and sages train themselves to withdraw their consciousness from the sensory world and enter another one. How do they do that?
Well, by practice. That's what you're referring to there in the Patanjali's system of yoga is pratyahara, first of the 8-step yoga. It's basically quieting your sensory. The best way to practice that, this gets into the subject of meditation and yoga, is to establish a meditation practice, a yoga practice. Do it at a time when you're not going to be distracted by family or probably most teachers recommend early in the morning, and you withdraw within. And I think we've all had the experience where we're absorbed in some thought so deeply that we don't hear things going on around us. Well, what you're referring to there is where you really take it to a higher level and you're really absorbed in the object of your meditation, whether it's a flower, a mandala, a verse, whatever it is, a virtue. With practice, it's like anything, practice, practice, practice. And for some people it comes easily, others have to work very hard at it.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. So let me put this up there. There we go. Oh yeah, here's a verse. Thy shadows live and vanish. That which in thee shall live forever is not a fleeting life. In the voice, the word shadows is used a number of times. Anybody want to guess what that refers to? What part of what part of us does it refer to? Just go ahead and speak out if you have a guess. Thy shadows live and vanish. They're talking about our physical bodies, right?
Body. Yeah. Our body.
Yeah. But it's here for one incarnation. And she could have used another word besides shadows. Did somebody else have a comment? Sergey?
I have a comment because they remember from the Bible, don't collect the treasures on the earth. Please take them to the heaven. It's mean take them up, not keep on the seat. What I take from this picture. Yes.
Yeah. Was that St. Paul that said that?
Yeah, there's the Paul. Yeah, and also it's one of the Jesus parable. Yes.
Very good. So I put this little cartoon in there just to add a little levity to it. Let me see, what's the caption? Oh yeah, the guy's sitting at his desk with his laptop open. He says, "Thank goodness you're here." He's looking at death. "Thank goodness you're here. I can't accomplish anything unless I have a deadline." So this is from Khalil Gibran's Prophet. For life and death are one. We like to separate those, don't we? Life and death are one, even as the river and the sea are one. So many people, they avoid the subject of death. It's like they're afraid to even talk about it. And if they do talk about it, they get very morose and somber and or sad. It's all part of the same, when you look at the theosophical view of life, it's an ongoing cycle. And I think for a lot of people, they think of death as the end, like a terminating point. Now, the Gita has this in discourse number 2, verse 18. Regarded as having a termination of existence are these fleshly garments. Immutable, imperishable, and limitless is the indwelling self. When we talk about a person having unlimited potential, that limitless potential comes from the higher self, manifests through the lower self. So let's just pause here. I'll minimize the screen in a second, but what is it that really, truly dies? And let's also consider the ways that people often characterize death, not necessarily theosophists, but people in general. Also consider in what way, now this is from the theosophical perspective perhaps, in what way is death an illusion? In what sense is it a reality? And why do people, so many people, I don't think we have that problem, but a lot of people don't like to talk about it. Oh, can you change the subject? That's so horrible. So what really dies? That's the easy one. Let me answer that. I mean, they're obvious living creatures. But what else? Plants, right? Animals, human beings, they're the part that we can see with our senses, that part dies, it undergoes a death. What else? Customs die, right? Over time, ideas die. Ideas are relevant at some point in history, and then people outgrow those ideas, new ideas come in. What else? Relationships. We talked about relationships earlier. Discernment. Relationships come and go. Somebody had a comment?
Languages die.
Oh, exactly. Oh, very good. Yeah, words change over time. What's a dead Latin? Dead language. Well, it's not entirely dead because in medical journals and stuff, but nobody speaks. Yeah, languages change over time. Words. If you look at the poetry of Chaucer from medieval England, you can't even understand the words. We don't use those. So our language is changing all the time. What else? Memories die. We lose I suppose that memories are embedded, we could say somewhere in the etheric or the higher self, but at our conscious level, we let go of things we can't remember, and sometimes that's a good thing. And if you expand the time scale to millions and millions of years, well, we know that even suns, stars die, universes implode. Then look at how people, generally speaking, characterize death. First of all, there's a natural death. If somebody's talking about a family member that passed away peacefully, they say, well, thank goodness he died a natural death. He died in his bed, or she died in her bed. But then you have sudden deaths, like a traffic accident. And if it happens to, especially a young person, that's kind of tragic, right? So you could have a tragic death, somebody that dies prematurely. Of course, according to karma, maybe it wasn't, but from our point of view, it seems like that person didn't get a chance to really live out their life and fulfill their potential. Then there's a slow death, like people that contact an illness that just eats away and they just can never recover, and they just gradually lose their energy, their body declines, and sometimes it lasts a year or longer, and it's just a slow, drawn out death. Nobody wants that. right? Nobody wants that. I think if we all had our choice, I want to die in my sleep, a nice peaceful death. But was it Leadbeater or Besson? Somebody said, when you have a illness like that you're bedridden, maybe cancer or something, leukemia, and you just can't, there is a positive side to that. There's a silver lining to that dark cloud in that it gives that person a chance to withdraw. Remember, we talked about pratyahara, withdrawing the sense of, we become a little withdrawn from the world, not so attached. And by doing that, it gives us an easier transition to the next plane of existence because we're not clinging. And it also gives that person, if they choose to take advantage of this opportunity, to review their life, assess what their life has been about, what were the important things, the important relationships in my life. Because a lot of times you don't do that because you're so caught up in life and you're in the moment, taking care of business, going to work. So sometimes there is a blessing in a long drawn out, not that we want that, but that's the positive side of that. Then there's also, go ahead, Sergey.
Thank you that you tell us about different type of death, but can you say your opinion about suicide? For example, less than 2 months ago, my longtime friend, successful, 84 years old, from normal mind, not any complicated, just take his life freely in his house on the second floor, around art, around dogs, around loved family. No, mentally, even the day when he took his life, we talk about Ave Maria, but by one of the opera singer. And then around 6 o'clock, he just go upstairs, put a pistol in his mouth and take his life. And sometimes everything goes upside down when you say cancer, complication, relationship. Just remember martyr, when we won't fight for the freedom of some other ideas. But then freely, we cannot say, I remember, know this man for a long time, clear mind, not any problem. But for some reason, how do you think when people do this, they want to send us a signal, but that everything is vanity, and all this peaceful transition from one world to another, it just, do you think sometimes about this? It's not shortage of suffering. It's not something physical or mental. It just maybe like you already finished what you plan to do, and it's time to go. In all the countries,
I'm sorry about your friend.
No, it's all right. Move away from emotional part.
Yeah,
I try to hear your vision, how you can explain this from the point what you present to us just before.
Okay. I've known people who, in my extended family, my wife's side of the family, who have committed suicide. It's very sad. And I'll say one thing about it. This was a fairly young person in her 40s, suffered from bipolar depression. She may have thought she couldn't handle life anymore, but it creates tremendous grief for those who are left behind. I've also read during the past 12, 13 months, a lot of young people have taken their lives because they couldn't handle the isolation caused by these severe lockdowns. Very unfortunate. Suicide is not recommended in any of the religions. In fact, it's usually condemned, but I think we have to be careful being judgmental about that because the conditions under which a person commits suicide can vary widely. It's different if your friend you said was in his 80s. It's different if a person who has already lived a full life, done a lot, not saying it's correct, not saying he should have done it, but it's different than a young person who has just begun to live maybe has some disturbances, mental, emotional, and takes the easy way out, easy according to them. That topic really, if you look at some of the theosophical literature, the Mahatma letters, some of the clairvoyant investigations done by Leadbeater, where they do speak briefly, they don't go into suicide at length, but they do say that these people, they're generally trying to escape something, an uncomfortable situation, or it could be physical suffering in the case of a person who's dying of a painful cancer or something.
Yeah.
But it's hard to generalize, but for them, they don't go on to the next level like you and I do, at least not right away. They are according to theosophical teachings, they put themselves in a kind of limbo because what they have done is wrong. How wrong it is, who's to judge them? I'm not going to judge them, but it's not in the natural order of things. And they are made to stay in that state, according to what we have heard, and they review that act over and over and over. And then they see how that selfish act, in many cases it's selfish, taking the easy way out because they didn't have the courage or the strength to deal with the circumstances of their life, how they've thereby inflicted great pain and sorrow and grief on their brothers, their sisters, their mothers, their family, their wives. They've created a lot of unnecessary suffering. So they're made to see all that, to drive home the message that this is wrong. Life is a gift. Life is a precious gift. And to take it flippantly, casually, irreverently is really one of the, I think it's a very wrong thing to do. But having said that, which sounds rather strong, strong statement, you can't judge them all the same. There are different ways and different conditions. And I guess you'd have to be God or somebody to really know. But anyway, I guess that's, I can see why you brought that up because it does kind of fit in with the subject of death.
Yeah.
And, but, the main point, I think, of my essay and of theosophy in general is death is not the end. Death is a natural occurrence. And it's
Can you use the word mystery? Maybe sometimes don't try explain every our action, every our, maybe sometimes I never hear in your presentation the word unknown, mystery. We will know this. When we have something, it's take us easily without so good overthinking. Sometimes I, like a philosopher, I think I overthink things.
Yes.
Don't overthink. And maybe we will take how it is. And you say, yes, things happen. It's a mystery. Yes, we know this and that. We can read, we can make a lecture, we can read this, we can do this. But suddenly some things in our life, this is the, how we say, the wonder of being alive. Because we see there not only mystery, but we see something wonder, wonder of the being this world, the wonder, Yeah,
I do. Yeah, I agree. Life would be very much less. If life would be worth a lot if it didn't have mystery and wonder and joy. And there are things. It's true what you said. There are many things we can't explain. And at some point on many things, we just have to accept that this is a mystery. I can't explain it, but it's there. And we also have to be comfortable with sometimes ambiguities. We can't clearly define everything, but that's a good point. So I think that's anything else on death. Otherwise, I will move on to the next section. I'm going to go to the next section, which was an essay on beauty and glamour. Beauty and glamour. Okay. I'll leave you decide which of those two represents which concept. From my book, few individuals are capable of living, and I include myself in that, by the way, are capable of living a life without being swayed by the pleasure-seeking principle. Those on the spiritual path have graduated from that sector of humanity where pleasing sensations are the end-all and be-all of existence. They find themselves in an intermediary state, aspiring to lofty and selfless goals, but still susceptible to the temptations of sensual pleasures and personal vanities. All right, that kind of reminds you of can't think of the passage, we'll let that go. So, St. Augustine, yeah, St. Augustine had a passage in his Confessions about that. You know, he wanted to live according to the higher life, but another part of him said, not quite yet. And I think I felt that in myself. I think most people struggle with that to some degree, at least at the early stages of the path. Beauty, boy, that's a word that's really hard to define. Sergey was just saying, you know, or not Sergey, but that's perhaps one of these words that we should just have, it should have a little bit of mystery about it. You can't really define it in a clinical sense. Beauty, kind of subjective from one person to another. I think we'd have better luck defining the word glamour. What do you think? In my essay, I said, make a list. Make a list down the page, draw a line. On one side of the page, put things that you consider beautiful. On the other side, put things that are glamorous. So, okay, let's just do that. Throw out some, let's start with beauty. Throw out whatever, a flower, whatever. Just throw out some ideas. Just speak out. Nobody's seen anything beautiful in their whole life, huh? Boy, you guys you're sad. You have never seen anything.
If you're talking about objective beauty and form,
I'm not,
so we can talk about roses.
well, this is subjective. You know, whatever you think is beauty, that's good for you. That's what I'm looking for.
Well, I mean,
Mountains, lakes.
when I'm saying object, I mean an object, in form.
Whatever, ideas, music, whatever. It's
Roses,
wide open.
roses.
Mountains, lakes.
Yeah. The smile of the child. Yeah. The stars, night stars. Beautiful.
Nothing.
Beautiful.
I like landscape.
Yeah.
Oh, landscape.
So I'm hearing a lot of things, which I also consider beautiful, things from the natural world. How about things that human beings manifest or make or produce? Can you think of anything beautiful there?
Art.
Art,
Some
Yeah.
beautiful buildings.
Yeah.
architecture.
Yeah, music, symphony, Bach, Beethoven, Tchaikovsky, Chopin, Nocturne, Ravel. This is something, Kant, philosophy of universal law, Plato, the parable of the cave. So many things we can. It depends what angle we take.
Somebody raised their hand.
Yes, a gesture could be beautiful.
Oh yeah,
Yes, yeah.
graceful, beautiful, depending how it's made. Like, isn't that what really good ballet dancers, they're working with movement with their physical body, and they've learned to make gestures in a beautiful way, graceful, it's subtle, artistic, with balance.
I was thinking more about a news that I just read that Mr. Ratan Tata, who is a industrialist, he paid for all his staff who died of COVID, for the rest of their lives, if they were living until the age of 60, and he decided to give full education to all their children and complete health coverage to their family. So that was a beautiful gesture.
Yes, acts of compassion, unselfish actions, helping others. Those are all beautiful things. So we could go on and on. But now let's turn to the other side, glamorous. What is glamorous?
David, can I say something about beautiful?
Okay.
Something else about beautiful that doesn't, when I was talking about objective, I had a hard time with that word beautiful. I really could not grasp what it was. And I began to contemplate and meditate on that word. And I mean, this is many years ago, because it seemed like it was so external, you talk about objects, that it was, could be judgmental. I mean, anyway, I just had problems with it. So I had this experience with the word that went beyond what we traditionally think of as beautiful, and it was the actual essence of beauty. And then when I had that experience, I knew, it was like, oh, now I know beauty. It's like I didn't know it before. I knew it as a word, I knew it as a concept, but then I knew beauty as an essence of what I am, who I am. And it was just an entirely eye-opening, body-opening experience. And I think in some native traditions, they have this relationship with beauty that's different than what we think. And they'll say,
Yeah.
beauty walks before me, beauty behind me, beauty above me, to the right, to the left.
And it's so easy to overthink. This is a simple thing. It's so easy to overthink it. It should be just instinctive. You shouldn't have to analyze it and sit down and draw, calculate. It just speaks to the heart. Beauty speaks to the heart. I know people have analyzed what are the elements of beauty, symmetry and this and that, but that's using your intellect for something that really you should respond to with your heart primarily. Then the other facets, you can look at it like a piece of music. Why is it beautiful? Because the harmonies move, but essentially it should speak. Now, glamour. What's something glamorous?
Usually we use the glamour when we look on the woman face, on the woman makeup, when we go to some parties, so you look glamorous, but because no, I'm serious, you put right eyebrow, right lipstick, and your face is sparkling glamour. For me, maybe it's my, because English my second language, glamorous, and I say you look sparkling, glamorous, you like a light ball. It's nothing wrong to have all this makeup for the ladies. It's not wrong. Or when you look, show us the actress, or you show us the lake, it's glamorous. Glamour, is less spiritual, I think, less spiritual. Beauty is something impulse, but glamorous is handmade.
That's very good, very good. That photograph there, by the way, the black and white.
Yeah.
You know who that is, right? Famous actress from a long time ago.
Marlene Dietrich.
Yes, very good, very good. Okay, very good. Oops. I lost I seem to have, are you still there?
Yeah.
Oh. There we go. Hang on one second here. Yeah, I think the gentleman I was just speaking, he pretty much, we don't really associate glamour with a spiritual life. But people sometimes confuse things that are glamorous with things that are have, what's the word? The phrase Tinseltown for Hollywood. A lot of bright lights, very attractive. It's like, but after, you get tired of it very quickly. Novelty, sensationalism. They don't hold up over time very well. And an example of that if you look at a lot of popular music, it is very simple. Tunes might be played, and back in the old days when we had AM radio stations playing the top 40, they would play the heck out of a tune. You'd hear it day and night, and pretty soon you just like, I had it. You know, there's nothing, you know what's coming. They're simple tunes. The lyrics are simple. The chords are maybe 4 or 5 chords. The rhythms are basic. The vocals are not that deep. They're nothing witty. So stuff like that falls in that general category. And I guess there's a need for that. But things that are spiritual, like somebody had mentioned Beethoven, some of the good compositions by Beethoven, Mozart, touch us at a very deep spiritual level, an entirely different level than listening to, a very, pop music that is really got nothing to it other than it pleasing in the moment, but something that you grow very tired of. But if you read a good book like the Gita, or listen to a Beethoven string quartet, or listen to one of his great symphonies, you can go back again, years later, again, and you always are nourished. You find something that sustains you at a higher level. All right, let me return here. Whoops, now what happened there? Sorry. Oh, here we are. Sorry about that. Here we go. Oh my gosh. Somehow, I apologize, somehow I got way back to the beginning there. Okay, here we were. We left off right here. So now we're going to illusion, delusion. Let me just check here. I believe this is the last section. How are we doing? Oh, good. It's 11. We're fine. I find this to be an interesting topic. The aspirant, this is from my book, by the way, the aspirant, the aspirant, is warned of 2 dangers, illusion and delusion, both of which involve a distortion in the perception of reality, thus masking the truth of what is. Now, in my very simplistic way of explaining this, because I'm not a psychologist, not a psychiatrist, I will just say, if you ask me what's the difference, I will say they both involve a distortion, but in the case of illusion, that distortion comes from outside of yourself, whereas with delusion, it's internal. That's very simple, short definition. And here's a more elegant way of saying, talking about this from the voice, the mind, and you again, this is a often quoted verse so many times. I'm sure you've heard this many times. The mind is like a mirror. It gathers dust while it reflects. It needs the gentle breezes of soul wisdom to brush away the dust of our illusions. So that's one verse. There are more. The Voice of the Silence, as I said earlier, has quite a few verses dealing with this subject, illusion, delusion. So let's go to the next one. When to himself his form appears unreal. Some explanation is needed here. The word form is used in the same way that that earlier verse that used the word shadows is form, referring to our physical self. So when we get to the point in our spiritual development, when we see that this is unreal, it's not, it's a temporary vehicle that we use, then we're moving ahead. So that's another type of, now, another passage, thou must divest thyself of thy dark garments of illusion. And another one, beware, lest dazzled by elusive radiance, thy soul should linger and be caught in its deceptive life. Remember that earlier verse? Don't tarry in the pleasure grounds of the senses. This kind of relates to that in a sense.
Yep.
And one more, and then I'll go back. I want to ask a question about these. Oh, actually, two more. Oops, went the wrong direction. Beware, one more. The unwary soul that fails to grapple with the mocking demon of illusion will return to earth the slave of Mara. So let me go back. Did you notice something, a progression here as I put these out? It starts with this one. Just take a look. The mind, it gathers dust. We're talking about dust and gentle breezes of soul wisdom. Now we're talking about looking at our self, seeing that it's a temporary, this physical form that we inhabit, getting a little more serious. Now we're not talking about dust and gentle breezes. We're talking about dark, heavy garments of illusion, which distort how we see ourselves, other people, the world around us. Dark, meaning not desirable, because it's shutting out the light. Meaning, dark, meaning our vision is obscured. Now, beware. Now it gets a little bit like warnings. Talk about being caught in deceptive light. Elusive radiance, that's glamour, elusive. It's not what it seems. And one last one, and then I'll close this. I know you have a question. And finally, it ends with this. The unwary soul who does this and that returns to earth the slave of Mara. So let me just, you had a question, so I can see you. Okay, who was that had the question? Was that Van? I thought somebody did. No? The reason I selected those verses, and there are more, because it gives you, it was a progression from gentle portrayals of illusion to more serious ones. And what the point of doing that is that we are affected to different degrees, different levels of intensity, and sometimes it can be rather benign, almost harmless. But as we progress on the spiritual path, those latter verses alluded to situations that could be somewhat serious because you are on a spiritual path and more is expected of you. If you weren't on the spiritual path, there would not be that degree of seriousness about it. It would still be a problem and might affect your personal life. But when you embark on the spiritual path, whether you like it or not, you're held to a higher standard. And more is expected of you, each of us. And nobody is above a fall. No matter how high you might think you're climbing, you're subject to failure or fall at any point if you are not mindful of what you're doing each and every day. Or if you haven't rooted out some of these negative traits within yourself, if you haven't been working on them to get them more or less under control. So illusion, delusion, that's something to consider. I would recommend you go back to the voice at some point and just look for some of those verses and just think about it. What does it mean? At this point now, I'm going to go to the final topic. Remember I said this talk was, what was it? Delusion, discernment, or something. We're ending with Maya. So let's go back. Oh, yes, please, go ahead. Illusion, delusions. Yes, you have a question or a statement?
No, it's okay. I got it.
Oh, you sure? It's quite okay. We have time. No? All right. Okay, let me. Okay, so we did that. Okay, this is the glossary of the key to theosophy, illusion, Maya, the cosmic power which renders phenomenal existence and the perceptions thereof possible. So in that sense, and there's actually a passage in the Bhagavad Gita which refers to this, refers to the wonderful magical powers of Maya. In Hindu philosophy, that alone which is changeless and eternal is called reality in Hindu philosophy, not in daily parlance or when you're talking to people on the street. When you're talking Hindu philosophy, that is what they mean by reality. All that which is subject to change through decay and differentiation, and which has therefore a beginning and an end, is regarded in that school of thought as Maya or illusion.
Mm.
When we use some of these terms, always keep in mind we're using them in a specialized sense, because if you talk to your buddy or somebody you know, or your brother-in-law, and you're using these words, you're going to use it in a totally different context. One of my favorite authors, Gottfried de Perucker, has this book called The Occult Glossary. And he's a very, well, I like his writings a lot, let's just say it. This is just a short excerpt. He has quite a long definition of Maya. I just extracted a few things. The word comes from the root ma, meaning to measure. And by a figure of speech, it also comes to mean to affect and to form and to limit. Okay, what he's referring to here is when a universe comes into being, it comes out of, there's a homogeneous unity. There are nothing has been manifested, and it's a whole, it's a unity. But the very minute the universe comes into existence, you start to have things, you start to have differentiation, solar systems and so forth. That's what he's talking about here. As a technical term, that's how it's usually used in theosophical literature. As a technical term, Maya has come to mean the fabrication by man's mind of ideas derived from interior and exterior impressions. Hence, the illusory aspect of man's thoughts, as he considers and tries to interpret and understand life and his surroundings. Therefore was derived the sense which it technically bears, which is illusion. Now, this is important because a lot of people, when they first get into theosophy, working at national headquarters, I have the opportunity to perhaps come into more people like this than you would at a local lodge. Some people get a little bit carried away. This could be a dangerous thing, let's put it that way, from a psychological standpoint, for a person who's not well-grounded, who's not integrated, to dabble, because they can misunderstand this whole thing. And basically, I'd like to state it more elegantly, but they come across this term Maya, which is translated as illusion in all this great literature, and they erroneously, mistakenly come to this unfortunate conclusion that it means nothing matters. And nothing could be further from the truth. Nothing. That is so dangerous. And so when you're working with young people or new people, it doesn't have to be chronologically young, but let's say a person who's first getting introduced to these ideas, this is one of those words that can be a little bit risky if they take it the wrong way. And if they're not a well-grounded person. I've seen, it's just, I just mentioned that. I don't want to dwell on that too long. So let's go back to that. So it does not mean, Maya, it does not mean that the exterior world is non-existence. Because if it were, it obviously could not be called illusory. It exists, but it is not, meaning permanently. It is quote unquote measured out or is limited, or it stands out to the human spirit as a mirage. In other words, we do not see clearly and plainly and in their reality the vision and the visions which our mind and senses present to the inner life and I. That's pretty profound statement. I would say if you wanted to explore this further, whoa, I did it again. So hold on, please. There we go. Yeah, I would say you can go to online to Theosophical University Press, TUP online, and you can pull this up because this whole book, Occult Glossary, is there online. And then he gives this illustration from the Vedanta where a man sees a rope. It's dark, it's in the evening, he sees a rope, but he thinks it's a snake. Okay, so that isn't an illusion, it's a Maya. It's not that nothing is there, something is there, it's the rope, but he's not seeing it properly because of it's dusk, the sunlight is going down, and he misinterprets what is there. That's a very common example of Maya. And he says, this is what Maya means, not that a thing does not exist. Please remember that. Doesn't mean that nothing exists, but that we are blinded and our mind perverted by our own thoughts and our own imperfections, and do not as yet arrive at the real interpretation and meaning of the world, the universe around us. And then he finally, this is the concluding passage from the Occult Glossary on Maya, by ascending inwardly, he's talking in terms of consciousness, of course, by rising up, by inner aspiration, by an elevation of the soul, we can reach upwards, or rather inwards, towards that plane where truth abides in fullness. So I have now, one more quote. This is from The Secret Doctrine. She kind of says the same thing. It's called, the universe is called Maya because everything within is temporary. But yet, it's real enough to you and I who are in that unreal world. You know, it's real, it exists, but it's not, it's Maya, it's temporary. Now, I'm going to conclude with this article, and I sent a copy of this article, The Many Meanings of Maya, to treat. It's a good article, and it's by Richard Brooks, who was a professor of philosophy at one of the universities or colleges in Michigan. He also happened to be a member of the Detroit Lodge, and I had met him several times. Had the pleasure of hearing him speak. He had a very funny sense of humor, by the way. Very funny guy. So in that article, and I'm not going to go into this, he talks about the 7 aspects of Maya. And this can be pretty complicated. Cosmological, the ontological, which is, ontological is that part of metaphysics that relates to the essence or the nature of being. And then epistemological side of Maya is that branch of philosophy that deals with the grounds or the varieties of knowledge, the validity of knowledge. Then you have psychological, you know what that is. Axiological is the study of the nature, the types, or the criteria of values and value judgments, especially when it relates to ethics. Etymological, that's the study of words, their meanings, their history, and then finally theological. So just a couple passages here. We're almost at the end here to wrap it up. Maybe we'll have time for a little discussion at the end. Illusions are not just random fantasies or mere phantasms. They are orderly phenomena. They follow laws of nature, either physical or psychological. So Maya is consistent with laws of causality. You can see this. if we consider illusions like mirror images, the bent stick phenomenon, or the drop in the sound of a train whistle when the train passes us. I think I used that example in my essay. Those illusions follow laws of light reflection, light refraction, and the Doppler principle. Doppler is the sound. You know, you're in your car, train's coming, the gate's down, and you hear the siren or the whistle of the train, and the minute it passes you, the pitch drops. Well, in actuality, the pitch is the same. If you were the conductor on that train, there's no drop in pitch, but you sitting in your car where the train is going 50 miles an hour, those sound waves are stretched out now because it's moving away from you, and it's an illusion that the pitch is dropping. So from your standpoint, yeah, the pitch dropped, but from the standpoint of the conductor who's on the train, no, they don't. It's the same pitch. Illusions also depend on the structure of the sense organs perceiving them. Very true. Differently constructed sense organs, like the ear and the dolphin's ear, or the human eye and the fly's eye, many more examples you could come up. Those sense organs perceive the world very, very differently. So we might term this the epistemological use of the word Maya. So that's that on that. If you want to explore that article, Treat can send it out to you. And I'm going to wrap it up with two last quotes from The Voice of the Silence. This kind of brings us back to the very beginning. The first quote, learn to discern the real from the false, the ever fleeting from the everlasting. This kind of ties it all together. And then if it gets hard, if it gets difficult, here's a word of encouragement. Have perseverance. That's a good thing to have. Don't give up. Have perseverance like one who endures forever and ever. Don't think of yourself as this frail physical entity which is here for a short period of time. Raise your consciousness up. Think of yourself as an immortal being, a spiritual being, which comes to this earth to do things, to learn things, comes to this earth school again and again and again. And you have all the time in the world. Your time frame is not determined by the time frame of this physical body. You go on and you come back. So if you think like that, you can accomplish great things, you can make great progress, and life is good. So there we go. That is the end of my PowerPoint. And Treat, I'll turn it over back to you. Yes.
If at some point you said that when you're on a spiritual path, more is expected of you. By whom?
The universe, your higher self, karma. It's not your neighbor. It's not your husband or your kids. This is a very internal thing. It's a very private thing. Because if you're on a spiritual path, if you've consciously made that decision at some point, you've made a promise at some level to your higher self. And if you stray from it, you're letting yourself down. Now, there are many, many people, good people, decent people, who have spiritual moments, whether it's in church or walking through nature. They have spiritual moments, but they're not, I would say, this is just my opinion, they're not on a spiritual path. To me, when you say you're on a spiritual path, that means you're consciously, continuously making an effort to walk that path. It's like an athlete who is in training. He's doing all, he or she is doing all that is necessary to compete in competition, to train that body, and that encompasses getting proper sleep, proper diet, proper exercise, exercising with a good trainer. That person is on the athletic path, let's say. But a person that just occasionally goes to the gym, pumps some iron, does this or that person is getting, it's good. He's getting some exercise, maybe running on the treadmill, but he's not on that path his whole life. When you're on a spiritual path, people use these words very casually nowadays. People teach, it's a serious thing, and you know it. And you're not making it to, you know, somebody else. It's internal.
Thank you.
Very quiet. Humor is good too, by the way. Doesn't always have to be so serious. A lot of, like I mentioned, Richard Brooks, Dr. Brooks, who had that article, great sense of humor. A lot of spiritual people have a good sense of humor. It's a good thing to have. Cultivate a sense of humor and how to appreciate humor. A lot of great art has. I was listening to a piano sonata the other day by Beethoven, and it was the fourth movement, and it was ending. And the whole tone of that piano sonata was kind of light. It was joyful, but he ended it in a funny way. He was ending it, the piano was in the upper registers, the high keys. He was ending it with a cascading figure, 3 or 4 notes, and going down the register. And you just sort of figured that a normal composer would end that somewhere around middle C or whatever key was in, A flat, B flat, and on the tonic. And that's what it was doing. It played about 4 times, going down. And then at the last one, he skipped a couple of registers, went way to the bottom and the left-hand side of the keyboard, the low bass notes. And so that in itself was a surprise. And then instead of ending on the last note, mirroring what had happened in the higher registers, he ended on what I first thought was a wrong note. I said, oh my God, the guy played the wrong note. But no, that can't be. This is a professional pianist. And I realized Beethoven composed that on purpose. It was a surprise, a little injection of levity, because you were expecting it. He was playing for the audience, the listener, and you just threw that in, a little bit of humor right at the very end of the. So humor is a great thing. You got to have it because, you know, we got to be able to laugh at ourselves, right? Because we're funny, and you know, we have all these lofty aspirations, and sometimes we just look at ourselves and, you know, we're not living up. And you can either beat yourself up, which is, I wouldn't advise that because that doesn't get you anywhere. But sometimes it's good just to laugh, you know, at yourself. A little self-deprecation, gentle humor is good.
But also he have opportunity to catch up this last note of Beethoven, or when you listen to the aria Bellini in Norma, or see some paintings, it's also make you proud of yourself. You understand? Because,
Yes.
for example, if you tell to the person about Beethoven, with all the respect to him, but for some reason it's not resonate. This is the reason sometimes we have a joy when we make a presentation, lecture, for example, when I teach Russian language, suddenly I have from the student, they've making tune. And what you just say when you catch up about Beethoven, even you're not a composer, you know, let's make us proud of ourselves, not diminish our personal spirit and say, oh, we cannot reach the state of the higher power. No, we already, you know, if we catch Beethoven, if we can understand the Parthenon, if we read Blavatsky for 30 years, it means we are doing well.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I said humor's good, also beauty. I didn't ask this question, or is there? Oh, thank you. Not only is it good to have a sense of humor, but cultivate your ability to appreciate beauty in whatever form, whatever shape. I think that when you're listening to music or visual beauty, or, you know, viewing something, it's resonating something within you. And if you steep yourself in beautiful things, or expose yourself to beautiful things, you're changing yourself into a better person. You're refining your sensibilities, and that's all part of the path.
And also like what you are doing. This is the major part, run away from all kinds of depression, of all kind of, now you never mention, I'm so grateful you don't mention about situation now in the world with this COVID. We are here and we know how to stay in tune, in tune with joy, happiness, and not allow there any dark garment, it's your words, dark garments over our soul. Yeah.
Thank you. Anybody else? That was good. Thank you.
Good.
I can see you're a music lover, by the way, obviously. Are you a musician? Can I ask you, were you a musician?
No, I always go to the opera for many years because my background, I have opportunity listen from my childhood only classic music, not like all you Americans and Europeans. For example, one time when I was 13, one girl bring the photo of Beatles in the school and the principal expel her from the school. You understand? But, and now I understand it's not bad that I know by tune all the classic opera, all Tchaikovsky, all Bach, all Shostakovich. You understand when you mention, oh, this is rap and this is it. It's nothing, but at least classic music will stay forever. This is another point.
Yeah, I studied piano and I went to music school. I like the classics, but there are times I like something light too.
Yeah.
It's just like I don't spend a lot of time on it. Maybe in my earlier years I did, but I'm getting up there in years, and I look at myself the way I live, and not just in music but literature. I figure, well, with whatever years I have left, I want to try to use it for as wisely as possible. I don't want to waste it too much on frivolous things.
Yeah.
I did a lot of that when I was younger. I did chase a lot of frivolous things.
We all do. I spent 7 years in the army. You understand? Oh my Lord! Yeah.
But you can tell somebody who you see some people at an early age. They just seem to come into life and they know what they're here for, and you got to admire people like that. They're not distracted. A lot of us get distracted, but that's part of the path.
Yeah.
Learning to discern not only the real from the unreal, but the important from the unimportant. And that's kind of a relative thing too, because when you're 20 years old, certain things might seem important at 20 years old, but when you're 40 or 60, not so much.
Yeah.
Now things I'm older, and I'm probably with you guys too, things are coming into view more. These are really critical things, but you talk to your grandkids or whatever, it's just granddad talking, he's an old person. What does he know?
Yeah. And the concept of beauty really changed with years. The concept of beauty and glamorous. The concept of, the age take over, and we need to take it. Yes, some things start to be, in the horizon, we can see differently. The same thing, the same music, the same body issue, the same conversation. And I catch up, I'm 67, and suddenly I realized, new things appear in my vision. Some things, especially in poetry, philosophy, and literature, I start to understand differently. I open the layers like an onion. Remember the metaphor with the onion? We take the layer of the onions, and finally we get to this truth. Yes.
Yeah, we are like onions, aren't we? In some ways, that's a good metaphor. Just hope I don't smell like an onion.
Yeah,
that wouldn't be too good. I'd have to get a lot of cologne.
Yeah.
Yeah, David. I wanted to ask one of the quotes. Thank goodness you are here. I can't accomplish anything unless I have a deadline. What does that mean?
Well, some people work good under pressure. Haven't you ever, in your job, haven't you ever come across a boss or a coworker where they really thrive under pressure? A lot of people don't like that. I actually kind of work pretty good. I always have under pressure, but that was a joke because we were introducing the topic of death, and you know, you had this guy sitting at the desk with a computer. It's just making light, a way of making light of what a lot of people see death as. Oh, I don't want to talk about death. You know, give me a break. We're all gonna die. Come on, wake up, smell the coffee. Death is here. Every day people are dying all over. It's not that bad of a thing, unless it is a bad thing or tragic, like I lost my son when he was 19 years old. Now that, to me, that was tragic, because poor kid, just, you know, just out of high school. But, you know, in the normal course of life, if you're going to die, you know it. You know, intellectually you know it, but you really haven't come to terms with it till almost you're face to face with it.
Thank you.
So you can look at death in different ways. When my dad died, he had had a stroke about 2 weeks earlier. Very physical guy, strong guy, not like me. He's very muscular, and he was just disabled. And I went to visit him. Oh, let's see, the stroke happened on a Sunday. I think I was in there Tuesday or Wednesday, and he died a few days later. And I had never asked him this before, but I just had to. I said, Dad, are you afraid to die? Now, he was a Theosophist, and I was hoping he would say no. But he said it in a way, and his whole face was paralyzed, so he's talking on one side, but I could still see his eyes. And he said it in such a natural way that I believed him. He was not afraid. He knew his time was coming up. And he made the transition a few days later. And boy, a few hours later, I was sitting in reading some theosophical book. And I just felt I felt his presence. This was later that evening after he had passed away in the hospital. The hairs on my arms just tingled. I could feel, and he was enveloping. I could just feel him there. And it was for maybe 4 or 5 minutes, and then it was gone. He had moved on. Maybe I had brothers and sisters, so I don't know, maybe he went to visit them. But yeah, so death, you know, it's not a bad thing. It's going to happen. You know, you just have to prepare for it. And I think one of the best ways is not to cling to these sensual experiences, to keep in mind that we're going to come back again, maybe in a different shape or form.
Mhm.
But we are not this thing that will die, this physical. That's not us. You know, don't identify too much with this thing that you can touch and feel and smell like an onion. What we truly are is, you can't see it with the senses. You can't touch it. And if you meditate a lot, you get familiar with that place. And when you pass on, I think it'll be like coming home. It'll be like coming home. Now, it can be sad if a person dies prematurely due to an accident, like a mother who dies in a car accident. She's got little children. She gets to the other side. She's aware that she's no longer here. She's probably going to be bothered by her kids because she loves her kids. So, you know, that can happen. There can be sorrow and sadness for a while during that initial period of transition. Go ahead, Van.
Oh, no, I say thank you very much, David, for this presentation today. We learned a lot. I and Lynn have to go. We have appointment to catch up. So thank you very much, and glad to see everyone. You have a good one. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you, David. I really enjoyed your presentation, learned a lot today, took a lot of notes, and I see you spent lots of time on that presentation. Didn't expect it, but that's a great presentation, you know, a lot better than what I could put together. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.